Good day, sir. This is the Group 7 constitutes of Mark Tono Valiente,
Shirley May Ligasenhaber,
Juniel Makiling.
At this juncture, we're going to report the topic on Chapter 10, Gender and Ethics. To start with, on the theoretical treatise of Plato in the form of Socratic dialogue called Timaeus, he said, "Of the men who came into the world, those who were cowards or led unrighteous lives may with reason be supposed to have changed into the nature of women in the second generation." How do you decipher this allegorical and mythical phrase or adage? What does it mean in relation to our discussion on gender and ethics? How this correlates on the issue of morality and gender? To fathom its root, pay attention to this video.
There is this culture of ours that we have been inheriting, that our forefathers has been doing.
They chocolate everything until it was flat. Actually, it was flat and red.
These women have been through an experience that we can't even imagine.
It was the pain and the bleeding after that.
What is too harsh? I'll ruin a little girl's life, take all of her organs, cut them off. So she's just like a shell, just walking.
Would we accept a human right violation under the world of culture?
The underlying cause of FGM is to control women's sexuality.
My mum had to pay her extra for using a new razor.
It's just a heartless thing to do to a human being.
Eventually, FGM will be completely wiped out. We won't back down and we won't go away.
As you have seen in the short video, indeed, this is one of the controversial issues in our society on gender and ethics that involves specifically and enormously the woman. The female genital mutilation highlights the horrendous social injustices to women that have occurred throughout much of human history. These experiences definitely suggest that there has been a more methodical discrimination against women insofar as the whole tradition of ethical theory has been undermining women's interests. Men have not only made the moral rules of society, but they have done so in such a way that the female perspective on moral issues has been ignored in favor of a male perspective. Thus, philosopher Alison succinctly describes 5 ways in which traditional ethical theory has a harmful male bias. First, there is a lack of concern for women's interests to the extent that it relegates to women a series of subservient obligation, such as obedience, silence, and faithfulness. The second one, it neglects women's issues by confining them to a socially isolated domestic realm of society that does not rise to the level of legitimate political regulation. The third one, it denies the moral agency of women in the sense that women are said to lack the capacity for moral reasoning. The fourth one, there is a preference for masculine values over female ones, where the former include independence, autonomy, intellect, Underappreciated feminine ones, by contrast, include interdependence, community, connection, sharing emotion, and more. And the fifth one, there is a devaluation of women's moral experience in favor of male notions of moral rules, judgments about particular actions, impartial moral assessments, and contractual agreements. All of this ignore the more female approaches which look at the special context of moral situations. In this chapter, we will look at some of the problems with traditional ethics that have plagued the interests of women and consider whether there is a more uniquely female approach to morality that better expresses the female perspective. This issue of gender and morality hinges on two fundamental questions. How do men and women psychologically differ from each other, if at all? Based on those psychological differences, how do men and women morally differ from each other, if at all? In this part, we are bound into the classic views of those ancient philosophers on their positions, views, and concerns about gender and ethics. We will tackle how these views differentiate and correlate with each other, and how these different point of views expostulate and exhort the issues on morality and gender, especially in the concern of women. We are going to disintegrate these four major views on gender and ethics. The first is on Aristotle, about women and natural subservience, on Jacques Rousseau, on women as objects of sexual desire, on Mary Wollstonecraft, about gender-neutral morality, and the last one is all about instinct vis-a-vis social construction. Discussions of gender and morality began in ancient Greece almost as soon as philosophy emerged as a formal discipline. However, from the start, opinions about women's moral capacities were rather negative. We will consider just a few of the classic views in this issue, beginning with philosopher Aristotle. When addressing the first question previously shown, how do men and women psychologically differ from each other? On the point of views of Aristotle, he answered that men are psychologically designed to command and women to obey. It is nature's way to have some born as leaders and others as followers, and by natural design, women are the followers. The rule as followers, he argues, is most evident in the family structure, where there are three hierarchical relations: the household, master over the slave; the second one, the husband over the wife; and the father over the children. In each of these three cases, one sets the rules and dominates over the other. With this, Aristotle is not saying that women are slaves or children, but rather that they feel a subordinate role within the family, parallel to the way that slaves and children do. In view of these natural psychological differences, Aristotle proceeds to the second question: how do men and women morally differ from each other? His answer is mixed. All of us need to acquire the full range of virtues, including courage, temperance, generosity, good temper. However, each of these virtues displays itself differently based on the constraints of our psychological makeup. According to Aristotle, men's virtues are tied to their natural capacity to command, and women's to their natural capacity to obey. For Aristotle, then, there is a distinct type of female morality that is grounded in their uniquely female capacity. From other perspective, we find the notion of natural female subservience and the views of French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau that lean from the view of Aristotle. According to him, the first question above concerning the psychological differences between the genders, Rousseau argues that men are strong and aggressive and women are weak, passive, and offer little resistance. Nature has perfectly paired off these two opposing tendencies in the genders and thus made women especially for men's delight. It is his strength that attracts her to him, and it is her allurement that attracts him to her. Regarding the second question, how do men and women morally differ? Rousseau argues these natural psychological differences directly shape the moral differences between genders. Women should capitalize on their weakness and use sex to get what they want from their husbands. He depends on her cooperation to satisfy his sexual desires, and she submits to his superior strength when she gets what she wants from him. In view of this key psychological and moral differences between the genders, Rousseau argues that women need to be educated differently to bring out these natural differences so that they can more effectively entice men through their beauty and charm. It would in fact be counterproductive to educate women as men are. In shifting to another view, Mary Wollstonecraft examined mainly discussion of so-called gender differences, including Rousseau's point of view, and she said that it was enough. For too long, women have been both psychologically and morally misrepresented, and she was going to set the record straight. Yes, women are by nature physically weaker than men, but men have exploited this weakness and have imposed on women the status of fleeting objects of sexual desire, and women have fallen right into the trap. As to the first question regarding psychological differences between genders, she argues that men and women are in fact fundamentally the same. If doesn't appear that way, that is because of the gender rules that have been imposed on them. While young girls are taught to play with dolls, dress up, and be talkative, they wouldn't naturally choose their activities. Concerning the second question regarding the moral differences between genders, Wollstonecraft argues that women and men are fundamentally the same morally as they are psychologically. The moral status of all humans is governed by three capacities which distinguish us from animals, namely the reason, the exercise of virtue, and the passion for knowledge. Women have all of these features of personhood in the same degree that men do, and society should give the same freedom to cultivate them as men have. That is, any man performing the same activities such as raising his children would have precisely the same moral obligations. It's merely incidental that women take on certain social rules and not essential to their moral obligation. In fact, while women are commonly thought to be naturally virtuous with child rearing, Wollstonecraft argues to the contrary, that women are not necessarily good at it. Most importantly, women also have no special moral obligation to be subservient and sexually alluring to their husbands, as Rousseau maintained. In the context of instinct vis-a-vis social construction, Wollstonecraft experiences as an empowered and as an advocate women urge her to deny the psychological gender differences. Along with her overall emphasis on equality and justice for women, resonate exceptionally well in today's social and political climate. It is in the spirit of equality and justice that she fashioned her gender-neutral conception of morality, where man and woman alike have exactly the same fundamental moral obligations and virtues. Whatever moral differences there may seem to be between the genders are only the result of misguided education. The rhesus monkey study does suggest that toy preferences between genders are in some way instinctive and not merely a social construction that is imposed on genders through education or cultural brainwashing.
Good day. In continuation of our report on the female perspective of moral issues and classic views, we are bound to discuss those philosophical perspective that uses a relational and context-bound approach toward morality and decision-making on female, which is called female care ethics. In this part, we are conferring these major discussions, the Kohlberg and Gilligan theory on justice versus care, care and particularism, and care and virtues. Female care ethics. As we know, there are some psychological differences between genders. Female care ethics, it focuses on the morality and integrity of women, which primarily center on interpersonal relationship. So Kohlberg theory has 6 stages of moral development, which from selfishness to impartial justice, while Gilligan's theory, his studies use only males, and his justice view of morality was only the male oriented. Okay, so Gilligan's theory, a woman's moral point, Gilligan's shows that woman is different from men. So men are typically emphasize rights and principle of justice, while women typically focus on particular relationship. So we should attitudes like caring and sensitivity to context is an important aspect of the moral life, and that's what we call care ethics. Care and particularism. In moral particularism, morality always involves particular relations with people, not in lifeless abstraction, not in inanimate, not in lifeless matter, as we know. Classical moral theory incorporates some particularism by recognizing obligations to family, friends, and local community. While criticism, this is not a dominant feature of traditional ethics, as we know, and it may not go far enough. Criticism, as we know, this is the expression of disapproval, right, of someone or something based on a faults or mistakes. The analysis, like judgment, the merits and the faults, like that one. And lastly, in neo-noddings, care should be seen as component of virtue and theory. Care, in other words, care should be seen as the significance of a virtue and theory, or the importance of virtue and the theory, where care is nurturing character traits that we personally internalize as we do other virtues.
In continuation of our report on the female care ethics, we are bound to tackle about the 4 different options with regard to gender and ethics. As previously discussed, we now have before us a sophisticated theory of ethics from the female perspective, and the next question we must answer is what this all means for traditional morality. Are women supposed to completely cut ties with traditional morality? And what about men? Are they supposed to stick with the traditional role-oriented approach or adapt to the female one? Here are 4 possible options, each of which we'll examine. First, we have male-only option. Second, female-only option. Third, separate but equal option. And the last is mutually inclusive option. The male-only option favors traditional so-called male views of ethics and offers general abstract principles and how men and women should adapt them into their different gender role. The idea of a uniquely female morality is not a new one. It was jump-started by Aristotle, and only in recent time has it been refashioned in a way that avoids demeaning stereotypes of female subservience and inferiority. This option, as studied, it is flawed or incomplete because it centers on men only and their traditional views. The female-only option is centered towards women and their views and states that both men and women should adopt it. According to this view, men have hijacked the discipline of moral philosophy and forced it into an artificial system that worships rules and abstract principles and ignores the heart and particular context of morality. The main problem with this female-only approach is that its conception of ethics is just as incomplete as the male-only approach. If it is wrong for traditional male ethical approaches to veto the female voice, thus we should reject the female one approach to ethics just as we should the male-only approach. Third option is that there are 2 equally valid domains of ethics grounded in gender differences, where men should emphasize the male approach and women the female approach. With this, the psychological study shows only that men are more motivated towards group interaction and women more motivated towards intimate relationships. If the separate but equal option were instituted, it could have disastrous consequences for women. Take domestic chores like rearing children and seeing to the needs of elderly parents. We must reject then the separate but equal option regarding gender and morality. Mutually inclusive is adapting both male and female approaches to morality. With this, women have already internalized the traditional of ethics.
We have concluded that the best way of resolving tensions between the gender-related differences in ethics is for men and women to adopt both the male and female approaches to morality. In conclusion, so clarity is needed on what precisely men need to internalize from the value of female.